It is now 8:31, and I'd like to call the October board meeting to order. As we begin the meeting today, please be aware that that this meeting is being broadcast via the internet. So at any point, any of us, including some of you in the audience, may be visible to anyone watching online. Also, as a reminder, please silence your cell phones and computers. We have a full house today, and so there's no absences that need to be excused. I've got a couple of opening announcements. The Texas Higher Education Leadership Conference will be held in Austin November 29th and 30th at the Hilton Austin Airport Hotel. And for those of you who have gone in the past, that's a different hotel than where we'd gone before. The theme of the conference is 60 by 30 Texas ways to get there from here. As in the past years, the conference will bring together regents, trustees, chancellors, presidents, chief academic instructional officers, and other higher education leaders to gather information and to discuss issues of shared interest. The leadership conference will begin at 8 a.m. on Thursday, November 29th, with governing board orientation sessions that satisfy the statutory training requirement for the newly appointed regents and elected trustees. Non-statutorily required conference sessions will overlap with the requisite orientation sessions and begin at 12 noon on November 29th with Commissioner's State of Higher Education address. A panel discussion with Texas legislators, including the Honorable Kel Seliger, Chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee, will conclude the first day of the conference. Conference sessions on Friday, November 30th, will begin with a keynote address by Dr. Timothy Rennick, Vice President of Enrollment Management and Student Services at Georgia State University. Since 2008, Dr. Rennick has overseen the fastest improving graduation rates in the nation and the elimination of achievement gaps based on students' race, ethnicity, or income level. Other higher education experts on Friday will consider how to develop and implement relevant high-impact and large-scale strategies to reach 60 by 30 Texas goals and targets. The Georgia State thing is really interesting. We heard a presentation, I guess, a year and a half ago. They use this data analytics to identify students in trouble, and their results are just extraordinary. The annual the Texas Higher Education Star Wars Luncheon and Ceremony featuring the 2008 Star Award finalist will conclude the conference at approximately 2 p.m. on Friday, November 30th. Online registration is available on the conference, the According Board's website under Topics of Interest. And the board members, you have a folder, let's see, Higher Education Leadership Conference right here at your desk. If you look there and you see your status, whether you want a hotel, whether you've signed up or not. Anyway, if that is blank, if you could fill that out and let Mary know, so she can make those reservations. Let's see. I also want to recognize our 5 Texas institutions of higher education that received the first research awards under the National Science Foundation's new Improving Undergraduate STEM Education, Hispanic Serving Institutions program. The new program invests in projects that build capacity and increase retention and graduation rates for STEM students at Hispanic Serving Institutions. Congratulations to St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas A&M University San Antonio, the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the University of Houston for these awards, and for the research projects that aim to increase retention and graduation rates for STEM students. The Commissioner will now provide remarks on some of the agenda items that we'll be discussing today. Commissioner?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Stedman. We've got a full agenda today, and I think we've got some very significant issues. First of all, I'm very pleased that we're going to have a presentation from ICUT, the Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas, regarding what they're doing, how they're working on 60 by 30 Texas. We've been gratified from the very beginning that ICUT has demonstrated a strong commitment to this program. ICUT's a very important sector of higher education in Texas. They have over 125,000 students. They also get state funding for tuition and grant help. We have think about $178 million every biennium that goes to what's called the Tuition Equalization Grant Program. And so we are very interested in finding out how those kinds of activities are going. We have great institutions. It's important to recognize we not only have the obvious ones, institutions like Rice and Trinity, SMU, TCU, and Baylor, but we have a lot of small institutions that do extraordinary work and are gems in their own way. Southwestern, which is close by, St. Edward's, Incarnate Word, and San Antonio, which has been expanding dramatically over the past 10 or 15 years. We will have a presentation on dual credit. It's interesting that over the past several months, 6 months or so, we've had 2 or 3 studies that have been completed, all of which indicate that dual credit is working well. There are some areas for improvement that we will work on, but it's important to know that the data suggests that in its basic components, dual credit is working well, and we need to make sure that we continue to improve the quality of that program. You're going to hear a presentation on changing the pipeline to completion. You heard Chairman Stedman say a few moments ago that the theme of our higher education conference this year will be creating new pathways to achieving the goals of 60 by 30, that we can't get there doing business as usual. And this presentation will outline some of the things that we're doing that might lead to better results. I'm very pleased that we were looking at data this week for the Texas Affordable Baccalaureate Program. Most of you know what that is. That's a program that we initiated some years ago with grant money from various foundations, starting out with AT&T and including the Dell Foundation and others. And the idea is to deliver unconventional BA or bachelor's programs for a cost in the range of $15,000, which is less than half the cost of the conventional bachelor's program in Texas. We are now up to about 10 institutions that have either created these programs or are in the process of completing the preparation phase. And we think that, I believe, I should say, that these will have a dramatic impact on the character of higher education in Texas. I believe from the very beginning, if we get up to about 12 institutions offering this pathway to a bachelor's degree, that will be an incentive for virtually every public institution in Texas to do the same thing, create programs of this type. The data for these programs are encouraging, and we've seen a lot of completions for students that otherwise don't have very good results. You'll also hear that that we're doing a much better job over the past 5 or 6 years in creating access for low-income students and helping them to completion. That is going to be a major factor in whether we reach the goals of 60 by 30 Texas. I point out that we have two significant pieces of data I like to remind people of. The number one is the overall goal of the initiative. 60% of our young people, 25 to 34, that hold some form of post-secondary credential by 2030. And then the other data point that I cite often that shows the need to make change more quickly than we have been is that by the year 2050, according to the state demographer of Texas, by the year 2050, 2050, Latino workers will outnumber Anglo workers in Texas 3-to-1. So clearly we have a lot of work to do in terms of educational attainment. You'll hear a presentation on enrollment numbers. Obviously, we cannot meet the goals of 60 by 30 Texas unless we have more students in the completion pool. And I won't spoil the presentation by telling you we're doing better. We'll have a transfer report. That's critically important because I think that of all the issues that the legislature is concerned about in regard to higher education, I sense that transfer is the one that's most immediate and most urgent. And I think we're going to have to go into the session with some very significant plans for improvement and making sure that we move closer to our goal of every course that a student takes and dual credited by some other mechanism in one institution will transfer and count towards a degree in another. It can be community college to community college. It can be community college to university, university to university. And finally, an item that isn't on the agenda, but I wanted to mention, members of the board will recall that at our last board meeting, you charged the staff with developing some initiatives, some recommendations for improving the provision of medical care in rural parts of Texas. I can tell you that we've started that work. We're doing an inventory of the kinds of programs that are intended to increase the number of rural doctors, rural medical personnel. We're evaluating these programs, trying to figure out what's working, what needs to be expanded, what isn't working, as well as some other things and ways we might change the way we try to impact the number of rural doctors. We're working on taking a look at telemedicine. We're taking a look at expanding broadband, and of course, we've already made one significant shift in that we've increased the number of GME slots and dollars that will be allocated for training and work in rural areas. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for mentioning the rural health care issue. We discussed that at length in the Sam Houston State DO proposal this summer, and we're going to take that issue very seriously and hope to come up with some ideas how that can be that problem can be alleviated. Next item on the agenda is the strategic planning presentation by Ray Martinez III, President of Independent Colleges, University of Texas, Dr. Don Christian, President and CEO of Concordia University, Texas, and Dr. Colette Pierce Burnett, President and CEO of Houston Tillotson University. If you all could come on up. They will provide a summary presentation of the strategic plans for independent colleges and universities in Texas and how these align with 60 by 30 Texas. Anyway, thank you for being here today. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Stedman, Vice Chair Farias, Commissioner Paredes, and board members. Thank you very much for having us this morning. My name is Ray Martinez. I serve as president of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas. We're glad to be here today to tell you very quickly a little bit about our association, but also a little bit about our member institutions and what we're doing to help implement the important higher education strategic plan 60 by 30 Texas, what we're doing to help in that regard. ICUT is a nonprofit association. We've been in existence for over 50 years. We represent nearly all of the regionally accredited nonprofit institutions of higher education here in Texas. And in the next 7 or 8 slides, I'll give you a quick overview of our association and some highlights of some of our member institutions as well. Our next slide is covering ICUT's, I guess I have control of that, thank you. Mission and vision. I won't go through all of the information on this slide. I'll simply point out that for ICUT member institutions, we believe that integral to our mission is the belief that the entire higher education system in Texas is made even stronger by including independent higher education institutions here in the state. We have outstanding public universities here in Texas. We have truly outstanding community colleges as well, and we believe that the post-secondary infrastructure is made even stronger by including our independent colleges and universities. This next slide I'll cover quickly because you'll get some updated numbers on enrollment from the coordinating board staff later today. But in the most recently concluded academic year, we had about 1.5 million students enrolled across the state in higher education. Of that total, 126,500 approximately were enrolled in ICUT member institutions. If you look at that in total, we're about a little over 8% of the total enrollment of that 1.5 million, which includes community college students and health relateds. But if you take out the community college students, the 700,000 or so that are enrolled in community colleges and the health relateds, we're about almost a little over 19% of the total student enrollment for four-year public and private universities in the state of Texas. In terms of academics, our institutions, as the slide indicates, span the range of SAC-COC classification levels. We have level 1 member institutions, Jacksonville College in East Texas, all the way up to several level 6 classification systems, and many in between of our 42 members. We offer a variety of degree pathways, both traditional and non-traditional, to reflect the wide range of students that we serve. Importantly, and I know this is an important issue in past legislative sessions, Commissioner, and will certainly be an extremely important issue in 2019, our institutions offer many traditional or many transfer articulation agreements with two-year universities. I know that for our two institutions represented today, we offer a variety of articulation agreements. This is a very important piece of what we do and a very important policy issue for the state of Texas. This next slide talks about the diversity of our member institutions. We define diversity at ICUT broadly to include not just race and ethnicity, but also in terms of geographic diversity, zip code diversity in terms of where our students come from, educational background. Many first-generation college students attend ICUT member institutions, and also socioeconomic status. Of our 42 members, 21 are minority-serving institutions. Broken down even further, we have 5 HBCUs, 16 Hispanic-serving institutions, and 13 more emerging HSIs that are members of our association. Cost and student debt. This next slide shows that while published tuition and fees give the impression that attending an ICUT institution may be a lot more expensive than attending a public institution, the reality is, in fact, much different. We compare favorably with our public institution counterparts in terms of unmet need and average student debt. And I'll also point out the 3-year cohort default rate for private liberal arts colleges in Texas went down from 8% in FY 2013 to 7.3%. In FY14, the national average for private liberal arts colleges is 7.4%, so we're below the national average in terms of our cohort default rate. This next slide talks about financial aid. And what I'll point out from this slide is that we invest heavily in our students. 8 out of every 10 undergraduates at ICUT institutions received some form of grant aid in 2016 and 2017, with a total of $1.46 billion distributed. Of that amount, of that $1.46 billion, 85% was provided by the institutions themselves, institutional grant aid. And just one quick personal story, I am a graduate of an ICUT member institution, Southwestern University up the road. When I attended Southwestern back in the mid-1980s, my financial aid bucket had Pell, it had TEG, it had work study, but the biggest part of my financial aid bucket was institutional grant aid, which required that I maintain a certain GPA and required that I graduate Southwestern in 4 years. What happened back in the mid-'80s for me is very typical, even more so now, that is happening for the investment that our institutions make in our students. And then very quickly, as I turn it over, the only thing that I'll say in this slide is that we do an economic impact study. We update this study every few years. And we just did an updated economic impact study. We have over 27,000 full and part-time employees across the state that work for ICUT member institutions. And finally, as I turn it over to my colleagues here, 60 by 30 TX is an important part of what we are working on, and we were proudly at the table when the steering committee developed 60 by 30 TX back in 2013. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Burnett to talk about specifics at Huston-Tillotson University.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the things that are happening. Oops. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the things that are happening here at Huston-Tillotson University in Austin. The university is 70% African American, 24% Hispanic, and with the remaining being international students and white Americans. 98% of our students are financial aid eligible, and 70% of them are Pell eligible. So we educate that population that we're really focusing on for 60 by 30. We have 3 things that we're doing that are very specific to raising the bar, one, and then raising our enrollment. The first one being a strategic enrollment of Texas students. We changed our admissions and marketing strategy last year, and we saw tremendous results. We brought in the 3rd highest enrollment in the university's 143-year history, so I'm very proud of that. And we had an over 10% increase in just the Austin area because the university had not really been branding itself so much in the Austin area, but we saw a 10% increase of students from Austin, particularly ending up with 34% of the fall 2018 class being from Austin. Now, with that enrollment, that 7%, we had a 7% growth in our undergraduate enrollment. The second thing being the RAM Career Connections. I'm very proud of this. We have a Career Pathways initiative on campus. It's funded by a 5-year grant from the United Negro College Fund, and we're collaborating with key Austin industry partners. 3 of our key partners are Merck Pharmaceuticals here in Austin, HomeAway, and Texas Park and Wildlife, some of the non-traditional fields for our students to go into. This is our second year in the program, and our first year in the program, we saw a retention rate increase of 7%, which is directly attributable to this Career Pathways initiative. In the initiative, students participate in leadership development. They do engagement in career coaches, career portfolios, building their portfolios, et cetera. And they have counselors specific to them, similar to an academic coach. And that specific intrusive advising with our students tends to be very, very successful with matriculating them to graduation. And then the third thing is new generation educators. A recent study from Johns Hopkins quantifies the influence of positive role models, saying the study said that they found that low-income students, as particularly black students, are more likely to graduate if they have at least one African-American teacher. So a report from the TEA said that African-American teachers represent slightly over 8% and are growing at the lowest rate of 1.3% of all ethnic groups, minorities here in Texas. So this word is complicated, which constitutes 52% of all students. So the university is embarking upon an intentional recruitment of African-American males to be teachers. And we've partnered with Manor ISD and Austin ISD to be intentional about recruiting African-American males, to recruit, retain them, and graduate them to be teachers here in Texas. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. It's great to be here with you all. There's going to be a lot of information on these slides that I'll let you look at on your own, but just kind of point out a couple things to you to show that with my fellow colleagues in the independent sector, we're really working hard to meet the 60 by 30 TEX goals. This first slide is really about who we are as a school, and like many of my colleagues across the sector, we are very diverse. We offer lots of different types of programs. We try to make degrees affordable and accessible to students. We want them to complete, and so you see different types of students, you see different types of deliveries, you see different types of ages and all kinds of things that doesn't, often people I think paint a picture of the independent sector as being one thing, and we are many, many different things. This next slide really talks about, this is kind of a pride thing for me at Concordia, how we were maybe even ahead of the curve with some of these goals. In 1995, we started the adult degree completion program, and across the state we're graduating hundreds, maybe even thousands of adults over the years who had just about 60, maybe 50 credit hours, and we got them through their programs to finish their bachelor's degrees. We launched a Master's of Education program that went across the state to help educators in their area and at their schools finish that master's program. What made me so proud of that is to watch many teachers of color who walked across our stage graduating with their masters, becoming better teachers and moving into administrative roles. We joined an online consortium, as many other people did, to help students finish degrees over time. And finally, we've launched into online at an unprecedented rate, joining with other schools to make that happen, so that, again, degrees can be affordable, people can complete, and they can get through a program. This next slide talks about partnerships that we're engaged in that really hit many of the 60 by 30 goals, making us affordable and accessible, helping students complete, helping students learn marketable skills. And so you see that we're a part of the San Antonio-Austin Regional Transfer Compact program with about 20 schools, public and independent, that work together. We are working very closely with Austin Community College to figure out a way to help students stay where they're at, finish their 2-year degree, and then finish their 4-year degree in a very simple pathway. A lot of this is really about finding those easy pathways for students to think about education differently. Commissioner Paredes mentioned that earlier, that we have to think about how we do this differently. And it is across the sector. It's not just the colleges themselves, it's also the students thinking differently as they come into it. And so working really hard on that. And finally, this last slide really talks about individual programs at Concordia where we are saying we need to help students understand what their debt is, what it's going to be, how they're going to get through that. We need to help students understand what their marketable skills are as they move into their vocations and careers. And how can we find programs that make sense that students, as you talked about, Colette, will move from what they want to do into the program and into the workforce and the need for them. So we want to just thank you again for allowing us to speak to you. We're willing to answer lots of questions, and thanks for including us in the whole 60 by 30 text program.
Thank you for that very informative presentation. I've got a question for you, Dr. Christian. So how do you recruit these older students? I mean, how do you find them and how do you get them to your university?
Well, it's changed a lot over the years. Originally, it was a lot of face-to-face, and as we've gone more online.
Dallas-Fort Worth region and, of course, in Houston as well. But we also have many member institutions that are off the beaten path, so to speak. Southwestern Adventist University in Keene, Texas, which is south of Fort Worth. We have 3 ICUT member institutions in Abilene, Texas, Abilene Christian, Hardin-Simmons University, and McMurray University. For example, has done that. Wayland Baptist University, which is out in Plainview in West Texas. So we do have a presence in South Texas through multiple ICUT member institutions who have opened up programs down in the South Texas region. So we truly are present in every region in the state.
Well, good. I also had a follow-up question. Thank you for that. Is what seems to be the opinion of your ICUT members to work directly with employers for marketable skills and paid internships, and where we're finding a lot of focus to be able to completion rates can go up during that process. But tell me a little bit about that.
Well, and I'll ask Dawn to jump in and perhaps Colette, because I know that with their institutions they're doing that. But certainly part of what I do is travel around the state, especially during an interim between legislative sessions, to visit ICUT member campuses, to do things on the campus, not just to meet with the campus leadership, but to actually talk to students and get to know the campus and the campus culture. And there's no question the value of a liberal arts degree for me, it was life transforming. I was a first-gen student coming out of Alice, Texas. I know I'm old, and it was many years ago, but I think we've gotten better, quite frankly, at independent higher education, really in all of higher education, to open up the doors, and not just to open the doors and make sure that there's access to higher education for students from underserved populations, but that we find strategies to retain these students, and now even more importantly, to ensure that these students are successful. So I think that we've seen, I continue to believe that the value of a liberal arts degree in teaching me how to be a good writer, a good communicator, and a good team player, and all the other things that come with what we know is the value. And these are marketable skills. These are skills that we know from data from employer surveys. These are the skills that they're looking for. Liberal arts skills are very important, but it's also true that we have to work and identify what the local market is asking for and not be afraid to move in that direction, to pair liberal arts characteristics with more work-oriented skills as well. And I think many of our institutions are doing that. Dawn, you might want to jump in.
Real quick, we have a full-time person whose job it is to find partners for our programs. And so connecting directly with businesses for paid internships, for direct access into that afterwards, to help us build a pipeline, as you talked about, from college into the workforce.
And that Career Pathways Initiative that I talked about, we call it RAM Career Connections. And the funding was to do something different. And the reason I believe that we saw that increase in our retention rates as a result of that program was because students saw where they were going, because they actually get a career coach that's from the industry. We formed an advisory board that's all industry, so much so that our one of our curriculums, we had biology and we had computer science, and Merck is looking for bioinformatics. So they helped us to rewrite our curriculum and work directly with our faculty to say this is what we're looking for. So students see it in real life and they see actually where they're going. And we get a lot of that from the advisory council because we get stuck in our silos. And I'm not old like Ray, but but when I came out of school, I learned things in school, but then it's just practical. But when you get in the workplace, it's something totally different. And we in higher ed, we sometimes forget that. So this is, and the reason that UNCF funded this, we got $1 million for over 5 years, was because they wanted us to do something specific to move students to their careers. So.
Thank you.
One more point, Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ray, I really liked your slide on the cost and student debt, and I think that's a message that really needs to go out there to counselors and advisors, high school and even before then, because there's this perception out there, as you know, as far as in the last decade, the gaps have really closed in terms of the differences, but when there's parents and students looking for ICUT institutions, this is a little surprising to me, which is good. It's not as expensive as even I figured. You think of some of the larger ICUT programs. But if you look at that, you're more affordable than most people would think that you are. And you've made a big difference in terms of health-related institutions, 4-year institutions, and 2-year institutions. And you're right there. But people, I think, have the perception that a lot of the schools and universities in the ICUT programs are a lot more expensive. But I think that's something that y'all could work on. I'm sure you're already doing that. But in terms of getting the marketing, the messaging out there of the quality of the education the ICUT programs have as far as the value.
Couldn't agree more, Vice Chair Farias. It's an important, we're trying to be more strategic in getting the information out there about misperceptions, if you will. Don talked a little bit about that, the perception being that perhaps we serve a certain student demographic when the reality is that we have very diverse students at our member institutions. And again, not just race and ethnic diversity, but diversity of educational level or educational background and income, et cetera. So all of that is critical. And I didn't talk very specifically. We're very appreciative that the state makes an investment in our students. TEG has been around since 1971. It's been funded by the legislature ever since it was created. We're very appreciative for the state's investment. And again, personally, I'm appreciative because it was part of my financial aid bucket at Southwestern back in the mid-1980s. I know it's very important to Commissioner Paredes that state-funded financial aid be targeted to students that need it the most. And one of the bullets in one of my slides that I didn't get to was the fact that for the TEG program, today 6 out of every 10 TEG recipients are also Pell Grant recipients, which makes them among the most needy in higher education. If you look at the overall funding of the $171 million or so in the current biennium that's funded, that the legislature put into TEG, 72% are going to students who are also Pell students. And that number has grown, Commissioner, over the past, certainly 5-10 years, if not longer. So we're proud of the fact that we are targeting TEG dollars to the students that need it the most on our campuses. And again, as I talked about in my remarks, institutional grant aid is also sort of an untold story, Vice Chair Farias. We have skin in the game, and we believe that it's important to invest in our students, and ICUT member institutions and do that with institutional grant aid. So we appreciate you highlighting that. I don't know if Don or Colette has anything to add to those comments.
I came from a state that doesn't have an equalization grant, and that bridges the gap for several of our students to get them packaged so that they can enroll. It's just an invaluable investment in students.
Commissioner?
I wanted to ask a question. You've already talked about this, but in my going all over the state talking about 60 by 30 Texas, one of the most frequent criticisms is in regard to the marketable skills part of the agenda is, are you as a coordinating board, and you in particular, trying to turn our universities into trade schools? And my response is always, I'm still basically a broken down English professor, and that's the last thing I'm interested in doing. But it is important to note that students go to college primarily to get a better job, and that applies to whether you go to a public or a private university. Most of your members fit the model, as you've said explicitly and implicitly, are modeled or follow the model of the traditional liberal arts college. You've already talked about some of the things that you're doing in terms of paid internships and other forms of direct work experience. But what are you doing? What's happening in the curricula of your member institutions that suggests you're dealing with this issue? I should also say I'm also thinking about, I'm a trustee of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and as you know, that's a huge initiative for us to make sure that people understand that liberal arts colleges prepare students for jobs. So
one of the great advantages I had was to serve as Dean of Business for 9 years before becoming president, and that was my whole mantra, that what you're doing at this place gives you the skills to be successful in your work. And it was skills like having a voice at the table, working in teams, being able to lead, being able to complete projects, being able to make presentations. All those things that we talk about, marketable skills, are practiced over and over. And especially, I would say, at our independent schools, which are smaller in nature and smaller classrooms, these students practice these skills from day one. And so they have 4 years of practicing those marketable skills that when they get to that work, they are ready to go. And we build that into our coursework, we build that into our recruitment, and especially you'll see at the very end of our program now requiring a course which says, everything you've done over these last 3 to 4 years, here's how you translate them into what you're going to do in the workplace, and here's how you talk about them to be marketable skills.
The only thing I could really add to that is we've infused academic affairs and student affairs, so that there's a constant back and forth between what happens outside of the classroom to complement what happens in the classroom, and what happens in the classroom complements what happens outside the classroom, with students' speaking skills, their presentation skills, their soft skills, their elevator speech, etc. So our career services is actually integrated into academic affairs intentionally, and that helps the student realize they're becoming the whole person. And I think that's the beauty of the liberal arts education. And then being a small campus, we call ourselves the Framily, RAM inserted in family, and they get this whole picture of growing them into be a good citizen in addition to their academic work. And we're undergoing a program review because our Gen Ed coursework has not been reviewed in several years. So the core competencies that are coming out of general education, are they really appropriate for the student that's coming out in the 2000s? And sometimes the answer is no.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. I have a strong bias towards liberal arts fundamental education myself, and I think a lot of, as I understand it, a lot of the issue is just communicating to students, you know, that these are skills that are relevant in the workforce, and putting that on the resume and coaching them to do that in interviews. So anyway, keep up the good work. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's see, the second agenda item is approval of minutes from previous meetings. We've got 2. The first is our board meeting on July 26, 2018. Do I have a motion for the approval? Motion by Mr. Steen, second by Mr. Raven. All in favor? Motion passes. Second approval is the August 14th, 2018 special called board meeting. Do I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Plank, second by Mr. Raven. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. The next item is approval of the consent calendar for the entire meeting. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items that we think that can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more attention. Highlighted items in gray are the consent items on this agenda. I want to point out the practice of putting most of our rules on the consent calendar, given the extensive vetting process they will go through. However, you will notice that a few of these rules are still on the regular agenda. Those are rules that staff thinks we might want to discuss and/or have received public comments. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item be removed from the consent calendar. That will give us the opportunity to discuss that item more fully later in the meeting. Does any board member want to remove any of the agenda items from the consent calendar? Does any board member want to add any items to the consent calendar? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar? So moved. Second. Motion by Dr. Frias, second by Mr. Anwar. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is our major policy discussion, the dual credit education in Texas. Anyway, the major policy discussions are topics of interest where staff, policy experts, and stakeholders provide the coordinating board members with information on higher education policy matters or initiatives that have potential to impact Texas statewide. Coordinating board staff member Rex Peoples, Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, will introduce the panel and facilitate our major policy discussion for this meeting regarding dual credit education in Texas. This is a long-awaited and very important report. Dr. Peoples?
Well, good morning, and thank you. This is an item of much interest to a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and part of that is because dual credit has grown exponentially in the last few years, and the graph in front of you demonstrates that as of 2017, there were approximately 151,000 students enrolled in dual credit across the state of Texas. And the second slide will show that it's increased by almost 10,000 students from fall of 2017 to spring of 2018. And Dr. Eklund will have more to say about this when she does her preliminary enrollment figures. But as you can see, we had a little bit of a lull in the growth of dual credit for about a year and a half, and the growth has now taken off again and gone up considerably. So what we know is that, or at least what we think we know, is that overall dual credit has been a very positive force for students. It's certainly been a positive force in its contributions to student success and therefore the goals of 60 by 30. But all successes also bring cautionary notes with it quite often. And so one of the things that we want to try to make sure going forward is that dual credit continues to be a success, that those students that are prepared for dual credit and meet college readiness standards and have the ability and the capability to take dual credit have the opportunity to do so.